Rescue efforts are ongoing in the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk following a late-night deadly missile strike in the eastern Donetsk region. So far, 11 people have been confirmed dead, among them 14-year-old twin sisters Yulia and Anna Aksachenko. The Kremlin claims the Russian army only carries out strikes on military targets without any further comment. At least 60 people were wounded in the attack. The Ukrainian prosecutor general says the strikes were carried out with Iskander ballistic missiles. The Russian-made short-range missiles are harder to intercept by air defense systems because of the speed with which they strike. Kramatorsk's relative proximity to Russian positions also makes it vulnerable to airstrikes. Ukraine says it has detained a Russian agent who was involved in delivering information on the targeted location to Russian forces, including how busy the area was and where cars were parked. And as can be imagined, those rescue workers have been at the scene of the attack in Kramatorsk since last night. They scurried in and out of a restaurant as residents stood embracing and surveying the damage from the strike. Fast forward hours later, and many people are still standing behind police lines as bodies and the injured are pulled from the rubble of buildings affected by the attack. Many are too tired or too upset to speak, and a large crane has been working above the wreckage, pulling slabs of concrete from the remains of a building. Kramatorsk is under Ukrainian control but close to Russian-occupied parts of the country. President Volodymyr Zelensky, commenting after the attack, says the attack took place on the anniversary of the Russian terrorist attack on Kramatorsk, a shopping area center where 22 people were killed. He said every act of terror proves again and again that Russia deserves one thing as a consequence of all it has done, and that is defeat and a tribunal, fair and lawful trials against all Russian murderers and terrorists. Well, Russia claims its attack in Kramatorsk targeted Ukrainian commanders as Russia only attacks military targets and not civilian ones. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters earlier today that the Russian Federation does not strike at civilian infrastructure, that strikes are carried out on objects that are connected with military infrastructure in one way or another. Ukraine's defense ministry says Ukraine air defense systems are insufficient to protect the entire country from Russian attacks, adding that Russians have air superiority across the front line, overstretching Kyiv's defenders, which is why weapons to shore up Ukraine's air defense are always on top of its wish list. Ukraine has repeatedly asked allies to provide modern fighter jets to repel Russian attacks on its territory. And as the Russian invasion of Ukraine enters its 17th month, Russia has been accused of ramping up its use of a dangerous, low-cost assault drone capable of destroying equipment many times its value. The Lancet drone, an angular grey tube with two pairs of four wings, has been an increasing threat on Ukraine's front lines in recent months, according to Ukrainian soldiers. Although the device was first unveiled in 2021, several soldiers said the frequency of their use had increased in recent months. Russia's defense ministry has been encouraging an increase of production of the Lancet as a cheap way to hit high-value Western equipment given to Ukraine for its counteroffensive. Assault drones can either send payloads to hit their target or be used as a single-use loitering munitions, where they are strapped with explosives and ram the target themselves.
Безпілотниками ланцети, їхні ці
Lancet 3, which is an improved version of the original Lancet that is used right now, is a system that flies up to 40 to 50 kilometers. So it's got a limited range. It flies a lot, obviously its distance of use is a lot less than Shahed that Russia is using, but it's greater than any other combat asset that Russian military has in its arsenal. And so the Lancet 3 has a very important role. It is a system that can strike in depth at the Ukrainian assets. And Lancets are going after high-priced targets, such as artillery systems, rocket systems, as well as single systems like tanks and others. We're starting to see more Landsat 3 used by the Russian military, at least by the frequency of posts that are on social media.
And the Kremlin has responded to a U.S. media report suggesting a top Russian general had known in advance about Saturday's aborted mutiny by mercenaries, saying there would be a lot of speculation in the aftermath of the weekend's events. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov responded to a question regarding a report in the New York Times newspaper, citing U.S. officials as saying that General Sergei Sorovikin, the deputy commander of Russia's military operations in Ukraine, had advanced knowledge of the planned mutiny. Sorovikin, who has not been seen in public since Saturday when he made an appeal for the mutiny to be called off, has often been praised by the Wagner mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin, who led the brief rebellion. In another development, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said he persuaded Russian President Vladimir Putin not to wipe out mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin. Mr. Putin initially vowed to crush the mutiny, comparing it to the wartime turmoil that ushered in the revolution of 1917 and then a civil war. But hours later, a deal was clinched to allow Mr. Prigozhin and some of his fighters to go to Belarus. Mr. Prigozhin flew to Belarus from Russia on Tuesday this week. While describing his Saturday conversation with Mr. President Putin, President Lukashenko used a Russian criminal slang phrase for killing someone equivalent to the English phrase to wipe out. Mr. Putin used the same Russian verb in 1999 about Chechen militants, vowing to wipe them out in the shithouse remarks that became a widely quoted emblem of his severe persona. Meanwhile, President Lukashenko says his country wants to learn from the war experience of the Wagner Group. Speaking to Belarus military in Minsk, Mr. Lukashenko said he put the armed forces on full combat alert and was ready to send a brigade to Russia to help Mr. Putin to stop the Wagner mutiny led by their leader. Mr. Lukashenko also recalled his call with the Russian president, in which he said he had offered to try to strike a deal with Prigozhin. While part of Wagner forces is said to be moving to Belarus, President Lukashenko suggested his military could pick up some of the mercenaries' combat experience obtained in Ukraine and elsewhere. Let's expand this as we check in with VOA's Anna Chedikova in Kyiv for us. Anna, good to see you again today.
Good evening.
So I want to begin with the attacks that happened last night. Rescuers are still scouring through debris. Apart from the 11 bodies recovered and the 60 people injured, has there been any more news about the casualties from this attack?
Yeah, unfortunately, yesterday evening, it was a very bad attack on the city of Kramatorsk, one of the worst in this past months in terms of casualties. For the moment, we know about 11 people killed, including 3 children, and over 60 injured. This is the latest numbers that we just got from the local authorities. We know that also that this attack was targeting the central part of the city, and particularly the recreation area with restaurant and civilian area around residential area. So unfortunately, it's really difficult for the moment to see any military targets around. At least if we look at the map, and at least if we are following this official updates. But of course, the city of Kramatorsk is very close to the front line. It's pre-front line area. And the city itself, definitely, you can meet a lot of soldiers in there. But this particular place was full of civilians, of the residents of the city, and it was full of people. What we also know that what was confirmed by Ukrainian security service, that person who was helping to target this particular restaurant area and including restaurant, he was caught by the Ukrainians who was helping Russian forces. He was caught by Ukrainian security service representatives, and he is now under arrest, and investigation will be ongoing.
And right, Russia claims it was indeed targeting military commands in Kramatorsk. It has always denied targeting civilians, but the city is their Russian targets, even though it's still under Ukraine. Are there any targets justifying Russia's attack?
For the moment, there is no information about any military targets in that particular area. This was the city center, so it's full of people. It's full of civilian infrastructure. It's full of children walking around. If we discuss in general, in Ukraine, there are a lot of course, military walking around in every town because of the war situation. But this particular part of the city, the central part of the city, we do not have any confirmation of any precisely military targets or any Ukrainian bases or anything like that, because again, city center, all the civilians know what exactly is located there, and it's really not an outskirt or not an industrial part of the town. It's really like the city center, the very center. So for the moment, there is no confirmation of any military target there.
President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking today, hours after the attack, says that he's waiting for a signal that his country can join NATO despite the war in Ukraine. How far has that conversation gone with NATO?
What we know for the moment, and this was also mentioned a couple of times already, that of course Ukraine is expecting certain signs, positive signs for future joining of the alliance. Ukraine understands that it's not going to take short period of time, that this is quite a long process. Ukraine understands that it's not really, it's probably not possible to become the part of alliance during war, while war is still ongoing. However, Ukraine expects very precise steps which would confirm that after the war ends, Ukraine will get this invitation. Maybe even Ukraine would expect certain political so-called invitation that, like, as I said, just a positive sign, a certain positive certain sign in terms of after the war precise invitation and precise cooperation. Also, Ukraine, and this was mentioned by President Zelensky, Ukraine expects fast procedure, something similar to what Sweden and Finland had. And also, Ukraine really wants that, really expect that this summit, which is upcoming in July, would give this precise steps and would give this precise, signs that alliance is ready to get into deeper discussion, deeper negotiations. What is also important that Ukraine would also try to negotiate, apparently, again, this is according to the official information and official comments from Ukrainian authorities. Ukraine would try to discuss certain security points which would be in place while war is still ongoing. So Ukraine needs this security guarantees, so-called. And these security guarantees would apparently be one of the main topics. But again, we cannot, predict, so we will see. But this is what is discussed inside the country, and this is what is stated by the Ukrainian authorities.
And the president also believes that the Wagner mercenary fighters are still in Ukraine, despite what happened on Saturday, and in spite of the fact that some of them, have crossed on to Belarus. What do Ukrainians make of a mercenary group operating in full glare of an established government institution in Russia while causing havoc in Ukraine?
Well, in general, this case with Wagner and how Ukraine sees this case, this latest events, I should say that there is no, official data on the amount of Wagner representatives which are remaining in the country. Apparently, we're not going to get these numbers to the open in the open space, but it could be that. So we cannot, we don't have any other information except of officially what Ukrainian authorities mentioned in terms of Wagner Group being on the territory of Ukraine. It's difficult to say for the moment, but definitely in Ukraine, it is still under discussion. This particular riot attempt, let's put it this way, and of course Ukraine sees it as certain sign of weakness of Russian leadership, of President Putin himself, of Russia in general. And President Zelensky mentioned today that. I think it was today, recently, that he do not see any danger. For the moment, he do not see danger of Wagner representatives being present in Belarus. So there is no enough, as he said, there is no enough forces on the territory of Belarus to start another attack on Ukraine or anything like that. So in Ukraine, this is not considered as a risk at this point, at least. But in general, this particular move by Yevgeny Prigozhin was really perceived very positively here in Ukraine, and people and officials see it as again, as I mentioned, a sign of certain weakness inside Russian leadership, but also, Ukrainians, of course, expected this to last for a little bit longer because there were high expectations that actually this could help Ukrainian soldiers on the front line. If Russian officials would have to, take additional forces from the front line. So let's put it this way. It's positive for Ukrainians, for Ukraine. It's positive from one perspective, and Ukraine keep an eye on what's happening and are very careful with any predictions about the future of this group, but are looking forward for the updates. And the story is definitely is not the end. It's not the final story, and we are definitely waiting for the updates.
Right. Thank you for your time today, Anna. I must thank you for this update, and please continue to keep safe.
Thank you. And
coming up after the break, staying with the Russian story, as ambassador to the UN says the country is stronger despite the brief mutiny by the Russian mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin and his Wagner troops. Please stay with us for details. Welcome back to the program. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says events in Russia over the weekend have shown that the war in Ukraine has deepened divisions in Russia, but that Ukraine's allies still cannot underestimate Russia and must keep supporting Ukraine. He made the comments after a working dinner with the leader of several NATO member states in The Hague, days after Wagner forces briefly occupied a strategic command center for Russia's Ukraine war and marched on Moscow before turning back in a rare challenge to its military leadership.
We all saw the events in Russia over the last days. These are internal Russian matters, but what is clear is that President Putin's illegal war against Ukraine has deepened divisions and created new tensions in Russia. At the same time, we must not underestimate Russia. So it's even more important that we continue to provide Ukraine with our support. I think it's too early to make any final conclusions on the long-term consequences, including for NATO. But what we can say is that we are, of course, closely monitoring the developments, and we have already increased our readiness, our preparedness, and our military presence in the eastern part of the alliance. We will make further decisions to further strengthen our collective defense with more high readiness forces and with more capabilities to ensure credible deterrence and defense for the whole alliance.
Last Saturday, we all have seen the mutiny of the Wagner Group in Russia. If Wagner deploys its serial killers in Belarus, all neighboring countries face even greater danger of instability. Under such circumstances, deterrence and forward defense is a top priority.
We heard those questions of ladies and gentlemen here about the Wagner's group in Belarus and the presence of Mr. Prigozhin in Belarus. In my opinion, this is really serious and very concerning problem, and we have discussed, and we have to make some decisions, very strong decision. It, in my opinion, requires a very, very, very tough answer of NATO.
In the meantime, the Pentagon has announced that the U.S. will provide Kyiv with a new military package worth up to $500 million in a show of support for Ukraine's fight against Russia. The package will include ground vehicles, including Bradley fighting vehicles and Stryker armored personnel carriers, as well as munitions for high mobility artillery rocket systems, according to a statement from the Pentagon. The package is being funded using Presidential Drawdown Authority, or PDA, which authorizes the president to transfer articles and services from U.S. stocks without congressional approval during an emergency. The material will come from U.S. excess inventory.
During his calls, Secretary Austin also reiterated that support by the United States for Ukraine will not change, and that remains our focus. And toward that end, the Department of Defense announced earlier today additional security assistance to meet Ukraine's critical security and defense needs. This is the 41st drawdown of equipment from DoD inventories for Ukraine since August 2021, and includes key capabilities to support Ukraine's air defense requirements, as well as additional armored vehicles, anti-armor systems, munitions, and other equipment valued up to $500 million to help Ukraine defend their nation and take back sovereign territory.
Well, in the meantime, Russia's Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations, Dmitry Polyansky, says Russia is stronger and support for President Vladimir Putin is consolidated. Reporters at the UN pressed Mr. Polyansky on the implications of the mutiny for President Putin.
I just wanted to... The people that are asking this question are obviously not Russian, and they do not understand Russia. Because if they did, they would really see it from absolutely different optics. The country has become more stronger, and the president's support has consolidated, and I think that's quite obvious for everyone who is open-mindedly analyzing Russia, not who has some Russophobic optics. They are, of course, disappointed, and I think that we will continue to disappoint them even more. I think he looks strong, and our country looks stronger than ever because we were united to repel this mutiny, and if you think otherwise, then I think you might somehow change your optics. This is our internal matter, which was settled in a very resolute way, and we're absolutely sure that our country has gone from this experience stronger than it was ever, and the president of authority showed to be.
Meanwhile, South Africa's Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor says African leaders will still seek an end to the war in Ukraine. Her comments come after the mutiny in Russia on Saturday and weeks after the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and other African leaders visit to Ukraine and Russia on a peace mission. Their proposals were to some degree rebuffed by both Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky and Russia's Vladimir Putin. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, who is visiting South Africa, says she wants to hear the country's view on the dramatic developments.